My name is Kate Arkle. I'm the research manager at Retina UK. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about genetic testing with a very personal perspective from one of our guests. I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Sears. Some of you may have come across him before on our social media and on our webinars. Rob is living with inherited sight loss and shares his journey with his condition via his YouTube channel, Blind Focus with Rob Sears. His mission is to inspire and empower others facing similar challenges. Rob recently made a short but very powerful video about his genetic testing appointment at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, which had a very surprising outcome even before the test results are back. I'm also really pleased to be joined by Sian Sperring, an ophthalmology genetic counsellor at Oxford Eye Hospital, who's here to provide some professional expertise. Genetic counsellors have extensive scientific knowledge and are specially trained in talking to families about the implications of inherited conditions, choices around screening and testing, and the outcomes of test results. So thank you both for joining us today. Rob, can you briefly just tell us about your experiences with sight loss? When were you diagnosed with a sight loss condition, things like that?
So I have had RP for as long as I can remember. I was very young when my parents told me, and yeah, it's something that I've known about. I feel like I've known about it my whole life. So it didn't affect me too much in my childhood. I was very short-sighted, but that was about it. But yeah, it was it's definitely something that's progressed into my middle age. I'm almost 43, so I consider myself middle-aged now. And it's definitely been for me, probably the last 5 years that it's really taken hold and progressed.
How's your vision now?
It's stable. The tunnel vision has progressed, so I'm sort of less than 10% vision, whatever that means. So everything is in the center, and I've developed floaters, which are I was very thrown off by them when I first got them up here. And after waiting to see my ophthalmology team at Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, they were just like, it's just part of getting older with retinitis pigmentosa. And as soon as they said that, I was like, well, okay, I can kind of live with those. It's very strange. It's like having a photograph taken with the flash, and the flash goes off, and it's that sort of weird pixelated. It's the only way I can describe it. And the strange thing is that when I close my eyes, they're still there, which is fascinating. So
yeah, it's really good actually to hear about these experiences, because chances are somebody will listen to this webinar who is experiencing the same thing and is confused by it or puzzled by it, and that will have reassured them. So the more we talk about these things, the better. So in your video, you go along to Moorfields with the diagnosis of X-linked RP. That's the diagnosis you've always had. In the video, you mention your mum and your granddad also having sight loss. Is that the diagnosis that they had?
Yes, so it gets a bit blurry. It's my grandfather went blind at an early age. I think, and my mum can correct me when she's watching this, but somewhere around about 60, he went blind.
Okay.
And at that point, it could have been just old age.
Yeah.
But the sort of thinking was it was probably something to do with RP, but it could have been just normal degeneration of the retina or whatever.
Yeah.
But my mum had spoken to Moorfields, my granddad had been to Moorfields, and X-linked RP was the thing that they said was in the family. And at the time, it was just like a 1 in a million chance that my mum and dad got together and this thing happened to me. Obviously, I think research has come a long way and our understanding has improved a lot. So it's not that figure now we sort of realize, but at the time that was what they were told, and it was all about the X-linked RP for me, and that's what we were told. So that was where it came from. But there was nothing official from any of the big hospitals about the genetic testing, but that was just
Okay.
what they'd been told historically.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, as you say, things have come on a long way. We're going to come back to your diagnosis and what happened when you went to Moorfields a little bit later. I'm just going to let Sian jump in. Sian, could you just very briefly explain what X-linked means, as well as the other possible inheritance patterns that we see in retinal conditions?
Yeah, so X-linked inheritance, just refers to how a genetic condition has been passed down through the X chromosome. So we all have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and one pair being the sex chromosomes. Females have got two X chromosomes, and males have got one X and one Y chromosome. So because males have only got one X chromosome, if they inherit an alteration that's on a gene that's on the X chromosome, they will develop that condition because they don't have that second X chromosome to kind of counteract it. Females, on the other hand, have that second X chromosome. So if they inherit an alteration in a gene on one copy of the X chromosome, they usually have a working copy of that gene on the other X chromosome. And usually then that's what we call them, carriers of a condition. But we do know that in some cases females can develop X-linked conditions, albeit usually much more milder symptoms. The other types of inheritance patterns you'll hear about is the autosomal dominant inheritance and autosomal recessive inheritance. So all our genes come in pairs. We get one from our mum, one from our dad. And in an autosomal dominant condition, you only need to have one altered copy of the gene to develop the condition, whereas in autosomal recessive conditions, both copies of the gene pair need to be altered to develop the condition. People with just the one altered copy in a recessive condition are carriers, and carriers don't develop the condition. There's a fourth type of inheritance, which is much less common to be a cause of inherited sight loss, which is mitochondrial inheritance. So where the gene is in the mitochondrial genome rather than our kind of usual nuclear genome. But like I say, it's a much less common cause for inherited sight loss.
Yeah. So autosomal recessive and autosomal dominant have got nothing to do with the X and Y chromosomes. Yeah. They're elsewhere, and X-linked is to do with X, the X chromosome particularly. Genetic counsellors are obviously experts in deciphering family histories. How confident can you be about the inheritance pattern just from talking to someone?
Yeah, so we always ask about family histories when we see our patients, and that's historically because that was one of the main tools we had for solving the puzzle before the kind of technology came along with genetic testing. But in many cases, families are really complex. They don't always fit into the expected pattern of a particular inheritance. So although when we take a family history, we might be able to exclude or feel that a particular inheritance pattern is more or less likely to be the case of a family history, without genetic testing confirming the causative gene, we can't really be 100% certain.
Okay, so genetic testing is a really, really helpful tool. Rob, in the video, you mentioned that for a long time you felt like you didn't need to bother with genetic testing because you knew what you had, and that was that. What changed your mind, and what did you do to go about arranging the test?
Well, what changed my mind? To be honest, it was probably the YouTube channel and talking to Retina UK. I spoke to Jane a lot, and it was something that we thought, well, that it would make a really good video. I've not been tested. I'd stayed away from it for a long time because for a long time I grew tired of being prodded and poked and tested, and I knew my eyesight had got worse.
Yeah.
And I felt I knew what I was dealing with, and I was happy with that. And I was kind of confident that I know how this is going to progress, and I'm just going to get on with it. And I found it an identity that was quite hard for me to relate to. I just, I really struggled with it. And it was only coming back to the communities when I was starting the YouTube channel. Obviously, a bit of age, you kind of, I don't know, I came back to it with a slightly different mindset, and I wanted to help other people, and getting genetic testing just seemed to make sense, for helping other people. So I was really confident that I knew what I had, and I was a bit brash about it, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Moorfields and I'm going to get the test done, and great. and as we said, it was very, very interesting for me, and I'm glad that I've now seen, you know, what a mistake it was for me to stay away, and that's why I'm so pleased to be on things like this, to encourage other people that might have thought how I did when I was younger to actually go and get it done, because it's super important.
Yeah. And how did you get referred to Moorfields? Was that, you mentioned in the video, the family link, because your mum and
Yes.
granddad have been there.
Yeah.
So did you just ask your local ophthalmologist to refer you down there?
I didn't. I had to go to the GP, and I
Okay.
laid on a bit thick, and I said, "Look, I know that it should be going to Cambridge, but I felt like, if I'm honest, I just wanted to go to London. I
Yeah.
just felt like, for me, that was where my heart was. That was where I wanted to go. I'd never been to Moorfields before.
Yeah.
My mum had been there, my granddad had been there, and I thought, I just feel a connection. So that's what I put in the letter, or the GP put it in his letter, sent it, and I got referred to London.
Yeah. And when you just briefly, when you talk about helping other people, that's in terms of research, contributing, is that what you meant?
Yeah, and also, we don't want to spoil the rest of the webinar,
No, but
what came out of it was really eye-opening, pardon the pun, for me.
yeah.
And what I've realized is that me burying my head in the sand and thinking I knew what I was dealing with, things move on. I said a comment in the video about, it was either the professor is correct, or and everyone else in my life that's looked at my eyes before this is wrong. And I don't think that was the wrong comment to make. It's more about knowledge changes, and this is why it's so important to stay engaged with Retina UK and genetic testing, because stuff changes all the time, and what might have been right 5, 10, 15 years ago, it's going to change. So we need to be able to embrace that change, and that's what I want to hopefully encourage people to do today.
Yeah, well, it was a fantastic video as well, that original one. Sean, for Rob's genetic test, he went along to Moorfields, and as he said, that's not his usual hospital. And the video shows him having lots of tests and scans before he even got to have his blood taken for the genetic testing. Can you just explain quickly the importance of having an up-to-date clinical picture with the retinal examination and everything else that the ophthalmologist has done in relation to then having the genetic test?
Yeah, so, having an up-to-date clinical picture, so having the retinal exam, the other tests like the visual fields, electrodiagnostic testing, although not particularly pleasant, I gather, is really helpful before genetic testing, because it helps the doctors understand the full scope of the condition and ensures we are testing for the right type of genes. We don't always get a straightforward result when we do genetic testing, so we often then need to discuss that result as a multidisciplinary team. So that's the clinicians, the ophthalmologists, myself as a genetic counsellor, and the lab scientists. And the genetic test is then much easier for us to interpret when they're considered in the context of all that patient history, medical history, family history, and those retinal exams that you have on the day of the appointment.
So it's quite important, if people haven't seen an ophthalmologist for a long time and then they decide that they want to go ahead with genetic testing, just to be aware that there's going to be, the ophthalmologist is going to want an up-to-date picture of everything that's going on with your eyes. So Rob, there are obviously going to be quite a few people listening who haven't seen your video. Do you want to tell us what happened when you went to Moorfields, and why it was such a bombshell day for you?
Yes. So I had testing, had stingy eye drops, which are like the worst. They don't get any better, the stingy eye drops, but they're I had testing done, a lot of testing, some stuff I hadn't done before, and then I went into a room and I had an initial chat with a doctor, and this was before I was seeing a professor. And I said it in my video, I'm very good at perceiving things, and I just felt like she was asking me a lot of similar questions, and what I was saying wasn't really making sense to her. And because my granddad and my mum had been there maybe a little while before the genetic testing the database was set up how it is now, there wasn't really much information. There was kind of knowledge of them being there, but there wasn't any kind of genetic testing done. So it was like, well, this has probably been done before genetic testing is done. So you know, this is it. So it's like, well, and the professor came in, and the first thing he sat down and said to me, well, he is a really, really nice guy, really fun guy. And he said, how do you know that you have X-linked RP? And I said, well, because of, you know, my mum and my granddad and blah, blah, blah. And that's what other people have told them and consultants we've seen before. And I'd been to Russia for treatment 3 times. And that's you know, that's what it is. Oh, so he sort of looked, he said, I've looked at your scans and I'm not sure that it is X-linked RP. I think it could be, I've been practicing this all day.
Choroideremia
is what he said. I'd never heard of that. I'd never, you know, and at that point, when someone is saying it might not be what you think it is, it might be something different, my head went a bit spacey. I was listening and paying attention, but I was just struggling to take it in. And I was there by myself. I had my cameraman Kian. He was filming the footage. But it just kind of spun my head. So he just explained why he thought it was different, and he explained that the 2 things are still X-linked. And Sean might correct me, I could be wrong, but it's very much, they look very similar, but there's differences if the right person is looking at what they're looking at. And so he was pretty confident that it was choroideremia and not X-linked RP. But he said the only way to know for sure is to get tested. And instead of just having the test, which was looking at one thing, we decided to go for a total genome test. And then after that bombshell, we kind of walked. I was asked if I wanted to speak to a genetic counsellor, and I said absolutely. And I sat down, and she was lovely, and she was chatting through it and the whole process and what was to happen. And I was still probably thinking in the back of my head, like, oh, I don't really understand what's going on here, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Signed up, went downstairs, had my blood taken, and that was it.
Okay, so the genetic counsellor, was it the genetic counsellor who went through the like consent for the genetic?
Yeah, she went through like top to bottom everything. And she was great, and she said she would call me in 6 months, I think it is now, and then she'll call me again when the results come through, and you know, talk it through, because obviously a lot of stuff can come out of it. So she wanted to make sure that I was fully aware of what I was signing up for. And it's not to say they're going to go looking for other stuff, but there's a potential that perhaps something else might get stumbled upon, and you know, we'll see.
Yeah, so Sean, just going off script slightly, do you want to comment on that at all, and the depth of the kind of consent for this testing? We're going to talk about types of testing in a minute, so it might perhaps be a bit more appropriate to do so then, because I think that's quite important. But Sean, after the Moorfields team had suggested this alternative diagnosis to Rob, he obviously went ahead and had the blood test. How important is genetic testing normally in with diagnosing people with an inherited retinal condition? And what are the other reasons that people might consider having a test?
Yeah, so obviously the main reason people go ahead with it is just to get to the bottom of the underlying cause of the condition. Like Rob said, you know, there's lots of different types of inherited sight loss that can have similar symptoms. So lots of the consultants there or ophthalmologists there are looking at your eyes might not be able to tell the difference in those kind of nuances, really. So genetic testing is the only way to find out the exact gene responsible for your particular condition. And having that genetic result, not always, but sometimes can help us understand how that condition might progress over time. And of course, then the inheritance pattern for the wider family. I think most people who are going ahead for genetic testing are hoping it's going to lead to a gene-based personalized treatment option. So we know that there are some RP genes where there is a gene therapy treatment or trial, So knowing the exact genetic cause of your particular condition means that, you know, the doctors can direct you to a potential therapy in the future. I think probably the other main motivation for testing for people is family planning reasons. So if you know you carry a gene for inherited sight loss, you can make more informed decision about how and when to start your family. Consider options like pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or prenatal testing. So it kind of just gives you a bit more of an understanding of what the scenario is for your particular circumstances. And of course, then finding out exactly what your genetic causes can help with things like when you're accessing support and resources like Retina UK, you know, connecting with individuals with a similar condition, and things that are, you know, tailored specifically for you.
And it's quite helpful actually when people ask me research questions. It's sometimes, particularly when they're interested in therapies, it's quite helpful to know if they do have a genetic diagnosis, because we can kind of home in on what's going on for that particular gene if there is gene specific stuff. But of course there are so many genes, but there are also now therapies coming along that are not gene specific, so that's not necessarily always going to be a problem either. Rob has already mentioned this evening, and in the video he explains that he could have had a test that would have produced a result within about 3 months and one that would take 12 months, and in the end he and the professor decided to go for the 12-month option. Can you clarify what's going on behind the scenes of those two different options, and also why the results do take so long?
Yeah, so genetic testing is obviously evolving all the time. So what I say today might not be the same in 1 month's time, 1 year time, you know, 5 years time. So I'll just kind of explain kind of the current situation with testing, at least where I am. And again, that might be different in different centres. And obviously I wasn't involved in Rob's particular case, but from watching the video, what I assume is when Rob was first referred, they hadn't confirmed if a genetic test had been done in the family. So if we know a particular alteration in the family, that's a very different test to the whole genome sequencing that Rob is having. So once we know the underlying condition or the underlying gene in a family, we can then test other family members specifically for that genetic change. So the lab will just look at that particular gene in that specific position, and either the mutation is there or not. So that's a much quicker test and usually takes anywhere kind of up to 3 months. Whole genome sequencing, however, is when we're starting, you know, with a clean slate. Nobody's had genetic testing in the family, and that can take as long as 12 months. So the reason it takes so long is you know, when your sample is first taken, is sent to the genetics lab, and that first stage is just the sequencing stage. So where your entire DNA code is sequenced. So that's what we mean by whole genome sequencing. And we have over 25,000 genes. So that step alone, just the sequencing, can take several months. The data produced by the sequencing is, at least in England, and I don't know what the case is for the kind of the devolved nations, but the data is then sent to one of the 3 expert eye genetics labs. And once the data is received by the lab, they then look at the DNA code and look at the individual letters of that DNA code for the genes that we're interested in. So although we've sequenced the entire genome, currently for retinal conditions, we're looking at about 280 genes. And the lab then have to decipher all the possible alterations in those 280 genes. And with hopefully with the clinical information, we'll be able to get a result, whether that's a finding something or not finding something.
Rob mentioned briefly, and what I was referring to when we were talking about consent, is there a chance when you're sequencing that whole genome, although you're really homing in on, or the lab is homing in on those particular genes, is there a chance that something else might turn up and the lab might discover something that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, and it is part of the consenting process. So we do say now that we are looking at the sequencing the entire genome, what can happen is we can come across what we call unexpected findings. So that's a result, there's nothing to do with the eye condition. And the reason this happens is, although we're only specifically looking at those 280 genes, if there's nothing in those 280 genes which causes any suspicion, the lab has kind of a technology that tries to look beyond that, and that's how we find these new genes that we haven't discovered before.
Okay.
But in that process, could come across a gene which is to do with something completely separate. It doesn't happen often,
No.
but when it does happen, we are then obliged to share that information with you. And I think, as far as I'm aware, it would only be conditions which are treatable or screenable in some way. We're not going to tell you about any, fatal conditions that that you can't do anything about.
Yeah.
But it would be something with some action that you can do.
Yeah. So you're not going to have to live with something hanging over you. So the chances of that happening are really rare. But in terms of the retinal diseases, what are the possible outcomes of a genetic test?
Yeah, so even after that whole 12 months of waiting, we can't be certain that we find a conclusive result. One possibility is we find nothing at all. So all 280 genes that we've looked at are just as we expect them to be. They're spelt in the same way as kind of this reference sequence that we compare it to. It doesn't take away the clinical diagnosis. You still have a clinical diagnosis of RP or whatever your diagnosis is. And we're constantly discovering new genes and adding them to the panel of genes. So it's important that we review those over time, and the results can change. The second option is that we do find the causative gene. We know it's a gene that causes RP. We've seen this particular alteration before in other patients, and we can be confident that this is the reason for the vision loss. In that scenario, we can then inform the wider family what the inheritance pattern is, and other people in the family can be tested. There is then a third possibility: we find what we call a variant of uncertain significance. So variants of uncertain significance are small changes within the DNA code, which we don't yet know if they stop the gene from working properly. So my DNA code and your DNA code will be slightly different to one another. And what we don't know is if that's natural variation that just makes us different, or whether there's a particularly rare alteration that we just haven't seen before. So we don't always get a definite answer either way.
Okay, I think it's just quite important for people to be aware of that possibility in advance, because it is such a long wait, and then you could get this uncertain result. But I think what you said is really important. I have had people say to me, I've had this result that's got a variant of uncertain significance, or they couldn't find the gene. Does that mean I haven't got RP? And it is really important to remember that clinical diagnosis that an ophthalmologist has made by looking at your eyes still stands, whatever. And it's just, we haven't quite got there yet with our knowledge of the genetics to be able to find your particular gene. Rob, when you went through the consent process at Moorfields and with the genetic counsellor, did you have any particular concerns at that point, or were you happy to just go straight ahead?
No, I was happy to get started. I think in that moment I was very confused with I don't really know how this happened. And
at
the time it was like, it wasn't that I hadn't been to see anybody. I'd seen consultants. My parents had taken me to consultants in Suffolk. And like I said, I've been to Russia for treatment, and all of the stuff, everything had been X-linked to RP. So when it was sort of like, well, it may not be that. In that instant, you're thinking, well, how has everyone else got it so wrong? And that was probably what I was thinking for about 3 months, until I started watching a lot of educational stuff for Retina UK. The genetic testing stuff is really useful, because it's just, knowledge is just evolving, and it isn't necessarily that everybody's got it wrong so far. It's just that, well, actually, maybe someone's seen something a little bit different, and knowledge is just changing. So, I kind of look at that part in the video and think, oh, I shouldn't have said that, but I didn't mean it in a like, well, either everyone else is wrong and this guy's right, or vice versa. It's a kind of it's a process like anything. And for me, in that moment, when she was asking consent, I had no trouble with signing it and saying, yeah, let's kind of find out what I should have probably found out a long time ago.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, if anybody listening is sort of worried about their own diagnosis, there's a lot of overlap in the symptoms between RP and choroideremia. They're both excellent conditions, so we've got that similarity there as well. And it's just that choroideremia does have a distinctive appearance at the back of the eye when you examine it really, really carefully. But of course, just like our genetic knowledge has advanced, so has scanning technology and the ability of ophthalmologists to really, really see in detail what's going on at the back of the eye. So, and you have this family history where lots of people had just said, you know, your granddad had RP, your mum might have had RP, so surely that's what you've got too. So I think there's probably a whole set of contributory factors there. And as you say, nobody messed up necessarily or made a huge mistake. It was just that things moved on. I've just realised that I haven't told our audience that they can type questions that we can put to our guests at the end of the webinar into the Q&A box in Zoom. So apologies for that. But if you would like to ask Sian or Rob a question at the end, do just type it into the Q&A box. We won't have, you won't be able to unmute and speak, but I can ask you a question on your behalf. So yeah, sorry about that. Do type away. Rob, how did you feel about knowing it was going to take 12 months? Did that just feel like an impossibly long time, especially given that you just had this sort of shock news that you didn't have the diagnosis you thought you did or possibly didn't?
No, I mean, we live in a society where you can get stuff the next day. You can buy something from Amazon and it's on your doorstep in the morning. So there is that part of me that was like, oh, come on, surely we could speed that up. But also I think there's a part of me, because of my sport and training and just the way I am, you know, I look over a longer period of time. So a training cycle for me is a year. An Olympic cycle for a Paralympian is 4 years. So when you're used to looking in them cycles, you know things take time. Like Sian said, there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. I don't know the half of what's happening to my blood tests. I just know it's somewhere and someone really clever is doing something really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't, of course I wanted to have it as quick as I could, but if it's 12 months, that's great. And actually what the professor had said before I went through was that you're probably going to be waiting for 12 months, but actually during COVID, it was up to like 2 or 3 years, the wait time. So it's actually come down an awful lot to 12 months. And like Sian said, maybe it'll be 6 months in 10 years time because of technology, but you know, a year is fine for me.
Yeah. And how you're 6 months into that sort of 12-month wait now, how are you feeling about that whole shift from RP to choroideremia and that news that you got that day?
I guess I'm excited is maybe the wrong word. I just want to know when someone says that what you think you know about yourself isn't correct. I just want to see if there is something else, perhaps.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that I'll get that answer. But because that has been brought up now, it's like, well, actually, is it something different? Is it X-linked RP? And I can explore that whether I get a result from the genetic testing or not.
Yeah.
But I think it took me 3 months of being a bit emotional about it. That was why it took me so long to get the video put together in the end.
Yeah.
Then it's taken another 3 months, and within that sort of 6-month period, my sort of passion now is it's like I went there thinking I knew what I had and I didn't, and that's because I've stayed away from genetic testing. I've not got involved in helping the community, and that's my fault. And I kind of feel like actually this is a great teaching point for anybody else that you might think you know what you've got, and that might have been correct 5 years ago, but things change. And why wouldn't you want to know what the latest stuff is saying, you know? And if it's different, it's different. Like we'll face whatever it is in the same way that I face X-linked RP. You just do the best you can with what you got and keep pushing forwards.
Absolutely. And don't beat yourself up, Rob. I mean, you can't blame yourself for not raising that awareness. And you have done now with what is actually a really powerful video. So it's fantastic that it's out there. And your YouTube channel is great as well for our community. What about your family members? Has there been any knock-on effects with your family members, or were they shocked or upset by it?
Uh, I think there's a bit of them that is, but also what is really interesting is when you start having these conversations about genetics, my parents feel a lot of responsibility and a lot of blame for what I'm going through. And I think that's a similar thing with any genetic problem, is that I never really appreciated how much it was hurting them to kind of know that, feel that responsibility for, he's suffering, he's losing his sight because of, whatever. So I think actually it was just nice having that conversation with them and saying that it may not be that at all. It may be something different. So because we don't know, there's really nothing there. And, I think it'll be nice for them to get a bit of closure and hopefully get some more information about it. But yeah, I don't think there's a big impact. My grandfather isn't alive anymore.
Okay.
So it's my mum and dad, and they passed it on to me. I only have 4 dogs at the moment. I haven't got children. So it's kind of like, actually, unless I choose to have a family in the future, which my wife is still on the fence about, this is just about me and my parents at the moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's nice. So yeah, we'll get the results and we'll see what happens.
Sian, just quickly, Rob's parents, I know, aren't alone in feeling some strong emotions around a genetic condition. Can family members access genetic counselling services? Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it depends on where you are in that journey, but we're very happy as genetic counsellors to, our approach is to consider the whole family. You can either be referred as your own kind of being, I guess, to discuss your family history, or come along to, family members' appointments, and a genetic counsellor would be very happy to kind of just touch base with everyone, and the impact is different on everyone. And so it's important that everyone gets a chance to have whatever support that they feel would be helpful to them.
So a genetic counselling appointment for an individual can become a bit of a family appointment if everybody in the family wants to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's worth knowing. Rob, in the video, I know I didn't send you this question previously, but you did mention research briefly in the video, that you wanted, I think part of the consent offered you the opportunity to have your sample sort of put in a research database. Why were you keen to do that? Did you?
Sorry,
I think
did you say why? Why was I keen?
Yeah. Did you? Am I right in thinking you did put your sample forward for research use?
Yeah. Well, it's a legacy. I'm not smart enough to be able to look down the microscope and work out the nuts and bolts of what is making RP do what it's doing to so many people. So if I can do anything to help further the cause for generations after me, to just advance that so that people can find cures and treatments in the future, then it was a no-brainer for me. Like, I just wanted to do my part. And it's maybe it's age, getting a bit older and a bit wiser, and but why wouldn't I want to help people if I've got the opportunity to?
Yeah, and I think the more Sian's talked about, the possible outcomes of genetic testing, and we can't always be sure what we find, but the more data that is in the pool for researchers to look at, the more sure they can be about certain changes. Because if there are more people that they can see have got that particular change and have got those particular symptoms, then it all adds up, and suddenly they can be more sure that that particular genetic variation is what's causing the problem. So, somebody in the future could get a really clear diagnosis when perhaps today they wouldn't do. So it's a really valuable contribution. Sian, if somebody in our audience hasn't thought about genetic testing previously and hasn't been offered it, what should they do now?
Yeah, so if they're already having regular follow-up with an ophthalmologist, local ophthalmologist, you can speak to them about genetic testing. It might be that they have access to a genetic counsellor in their clinic, or they might refer you to somewhere like Oxford or Moorfields, or they can refer you to your local clinical genetics department. So that's genetic counsellors that are based within kind of local hospitals that aren't necessarily an ophthalmology genetic counsellor like I am. So you wouldn't have your eyes looked at in the same way, but you would just have the genetic testing side of the conversation. If you're not having regular follow-up, and we touched on this earlier, I think I would recommend that you ask your GP to refer you to an ophthalmologist, because it is important to have these types of conditions monitored, at least on a semi-frequent basis. Although I do appreciate that, attending these appointments when there maybe doesn't seem to be anything new in terms of research or progress can be quite time-consuming and disheartening.
Yeah.
But otherwise, your GP can refer you without going through an ophthalmologist to your local clinical genetic service or to your nearest specialist eye hospital. And that can just be a one-off appointment where you just come in to talk about genetic testing. You don't then have to, always trek all the way to Moorfields or Oxford necessarily. But we see people from all over the UK, so it doesn't need to be your local centre really.
Okay, and just to let people know, Retina UK has a online resource called Unlock Genetics. Lots and lots of information in there about genetics, inheritance, and how to access genetic testing. And we can send that out as large print hard copy as well. And I think it might even be available as audio. So if you want to sort of go away and have a look at something and think about things, there's information there. And there's also a list of clinics across the country, across the entire country, including the devolved nations, and specialist eye clinics, but also regional genetic services. So if you're at all unsure, you can have a look through there and suggest somewhere to your GP if they seem a bit puzzled and not quite sure what to do. And we've also got a page within that website that actually you can send to your GP if you're meeting with any resistance or they seem to lack a bit of knowledge, which, let's face it, GPs have to be jack of all trades. They have to know all sorts of diseases. So there's a page on there that's specifically written for healthcare professionals. And if you're having any problems, you can show that to them and it'll explain why the referral is important and why genetic testing is important. Thank you both ever so much. We have got some really good questions actually in the Q&A box now. So we'll go through some of those. The really, really good one actually, which comes up a lot. If you have a full genome test and nothing is found, would your data be stored and then re-examined later if the information is updated, if new genes have been added to the panel or things like that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different pathways that happen. What I would say is that not to assume that it's routinely being done. If you're having regular follow-up with your ophthalmologist, then they'll be on top of things like that. But I'd say a lot of the results that I get now are reissues of patients who had testing even before whole genome testing, where now we know about these new genes, they're going back through that data, and they then are coming to us with a new result based on that. But it's not necessarily as straightforward as there's a new gene, you will definitely be tested for it. So it's just worth just touching base with your ophthalmologist to see kind of where things are for you in your particular scenario.
If somebody has had a test in the past, but not for a while, I mean, what's a sort of appropriate timescale to talk to your ophthalmologist about retesting your sample? Is it 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, so we moved to whole genome sequencing at the start of 2022. Initially, when we made that move, we were saying anything kind of pre-2020 probably is worth re-looking at. But even up until 2022, we were only looking at 111 genes. So, we've more than doubled what we're looking at. Those new genes are much rarer. So it's not that we've suddenly got this pool of genes that are likely to be the candidate. But But yeah, I'd say if you haven't had a genetic test at least in the last 5 years, then it's worth chatting about getting it redone.
Rob, somebody's asked how long it took you to get your appointment at Moorfields for the genetic test. So between when you asked to be referred for genetic testing and getting your appointment at Moorfields, how long was that? Can you remember?
It wasn't long, but I did chase my GP because the NHS app is fantastic for being able to see what has been done. So when the GP said, I will send this letter by the end of the week, I was looking pretty much weekly for about 3 weeks, and I went in and just said, look, this is really important. Can we please get this? Oh, yeah, no problem. So I chased, and I think I was contacted probably within two to 3 months. It wasn't very long at all once I'd sort of chased up a little bit. But
I guess
it wasn't Moorfield side that was, kind of holding me up. It was my GP.
I guess that varies across the country, Sean. Just before we started the webinar properly, I think you were saying your waiting list is a little bit longer than that at the moment, and it's going to vary, I guess, from region to region, but probably in the region of a few months, wherever you are. Rob, there was a question about your YouTube channel, and it's vanished from the box, but do you want to just give your channel a bit of a plug? Because somebody said, what is your channel?
Yeah, so it's called Blind Focus with Rob Sears. Yeah, that is it. So I think the video is embedded on the Retina UK website. I know
I think
it
is now, yeah.
And I think you can get to the channel through that. So if you go to the genetics page to watch all the other really cool information on there and all the other cool videos, my one's sandwiched nicely in the middle. But otherwise, if you just type in Blind Focus with Rob Sears, that'll be there. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Just type my name in and something will come up and you can get it. But if anyone wants to contact me, I'm sure they can email Retina UK, and I'm happy to.
Absolutely. And your YouTube channel covers all sorts of things, doesn't it? There's quite a lot of sport and things on there, and because you're an athlete yourself, so
it's quite broad. I'm focusing mainly on accessible fitness at the moment, so some fitness videos that are specifically designed to help people with visual impairment and blindness, so a bit more accessibility, because let's face it, accessible videos aren't really all over YouTube. So I'm doing that. I've got my triathlon stuff coming up soon, and I'm also doing a lot of helpful stuff for visually impaired and blind people. So I'm working with Ambutech. I'm doing some stuff around canes, how to use canes. I've just got a no jab cane, which is amazing. I've got a 360 ball on it. So there's lots of cool stuff coming up on my channel soon, and hopefully I'll be doing a lot more with Retina UK, and another video about Moorfields with my results, hopefully in 6 months.
Yeah, so we'll all have to look out for that. Perhaps we'll have you back for another webinar. Somebody's actually said this webinar has been amazing to listen to. I had my diagnosis in March 2024 after no symptoms other than night blindness. I've had my genetic counsellor appointment this week and blood's taken. I'm at the start of this journey. I just hope that we can find out some cause so I know the implication going forward for my children. I just wanted to say thank you. That's a really lovely comment. Thank you very, very much. And I hope that you feel that you're not alone in starting this journey. And yeah, it's great actually that Rob is prepared to talk about his, so that other people can hear about that. We haven't got any more questions at the moment. If you do have a burning question, I would suggest you type it in quickly, because we will wrap the webinar up if that's the end of all of the questions. You've both been absolutely amazing. I think this has been a really informative webinar, and I think a lot of people will learn a lot from it. As I say, there is more information on our website. If you go to retinauk.org.uk/genetics, you will get to the Unlock Genetics area of our site, and there's lots of information on there. You can also contact our helpline anytime for information about genetic testing or genetic counselling, or just if you're feeling confused about things. So yeah, do call our helpline 0300 111 4000 during the week, or email helpline@retinauk.org.uk. So yeah, do look up Rob's YouTube channel, Blind Focus with Rob Sears. Retina UK holds webinars most months, and you'll find all the details on our website. For April, we'll be behind the scenes with some of our amazing London Marathon runners, so hearing about their training and fundraising. If you would like to support our fundraising too, remember we've got our very own Retina UK lottery now, so you could be in a chance of winning with a chance of winning up to £25,000 every single week for as little as £1 a line. We did recently have our first £1,000 winner, so that made somebody's day. We'll be sending out an email over the next couple of days, which has details of where you can rewatch or listen to tonight's webinar, and details of how to book onto our other events. We'll also be seeking your feedback on today's session. Your feedback is really important to us because it helps us plan for the future and improve our events going forward. So again, thank you all for joining us. Just a couple of other thank yous have actually popped up in the Q&A box now, Sian and Rob, so thank you very much, very informative, thank you very much. Somebody else saying they're close to getting the results of their test, but hasn't been straightforward, and I've been feeling anxious and very much on my own. Retina UK has helped me cope. This evening has helped assuage my anxiety. That's fantastic to hear, and thanks to Rob and Sian for helping with that. So yeah, we'll leave it there, but thank you for joining us, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye for now.